embodies the spirit of the holiday like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. For 95 years, it's become a Thanksgiving Day staple.
1 million people line New York streets to see the annual Thanksgiving Day Parade.
It all began in 1924. The procession was just 2 blocks long and featured animals from the Central Park Zoo.
Interestingly enough, by 1927, they stopped with the zoo animals because they scared the children along the way.
It was originally known as the Christmas Parade, as a way for the nation's largest store to jumpstart the season of shopping.
Culminating with Santa Claus at the very end of the parade unveiling the holiday windows on 34th Street.
This was the earliest Santa balloon. In fact, Santa Claus has a strong connection to New York. In 1823, New Yorker Clement Clark Moore wrote about the white-haired, red-suited man in A Visit from St. Nicholas. You might know this poem by its more familiar title, The Night Before Christmas. Santa isn't the only star of the show. By 1927, the zoo animals were replaced by giant balloons. And at the end of that parade, the helium-filled balloons were released over Manhattan.
The thought was if we released them and there was a return to sender label on them, they would come back to Macy's.
Except instead of waiting for them to return to the ground, a student pilot named Annette Gibson tried to wrangle Felix the cat while it was floating. It got tangled in her biplane and crashed. Fortunately, both the pilot and co-pilot survived. Over the years, the balloons have thrilled children and adults alike.
With a series of enormous inflated figures representing famous historical and screen personalities.
The first balloons floated close to the ground. Even then, their enemy was the wind. Since then, they've gotten bigger and bigger. The only time the wind was way too strong to fly any balloons was 1971.
You consider how wide Central Park West is. Pretty wide compared to some American cities, but how wide the balloons are.
Some modern balloons reach 6 stories high and require more than 100 handlers. While balloons have been the stars, from the beginning, the workhorses have been the floats. Once just cloth covering a truck, floats have evolved into something more sensational.
You see something that is so quintessentially New York. You see the New York City streets, you see the crowds, the excitement, the marching bands. It is such a celebration of the season. New York is such an amplifier of great things, and certainly this parade is no exception.
From Felix the Cat to Tom Turkey to Santa Claus, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade embraces tradition, and tradition is what brings people together.
I love that shot, Steve. Those shots. And by the way, we're sitting here going, where'd you get all this stuff? This is awesome.
Well, the New York Historical Society helped us out with some of the video and some of the pictures. Macy's actually had some old pictures as well. And then just doing some digging and research to try to find some of the stories, like the story of Annette Gibson.
That was great.
Who tried to catch
poor Annette.
I know, no kidding. You know, the funny thing about her is that a year later, and by the way, she survived, but a year later, she started an all-women's race at Floyd Bennett Field. And you know who was in that race? Amelia Earhart.
I was just going to say Amelia Earhart.
Amelia
Earhart.
In the 30s. Yeah,
wow.
1932.
When she went down in 36.
But I loved going through all of that. I wish that could have been a much longer piece.
Well,
we would have had more of that guy who was talking about perambulating down Broadway.
And you know, it reminds you of the old Miracle on 34th Street, which I think was probably shot in like 1946
was Miracle on 34th Street, and some of the actors actually had their own float. They didn't know that it was going to be that big of a hit, but they had their own float that year as well.
And you know, the other thing is how it's changed. The one thing, and I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it's much more commercial, and you see the rock stars there.
The funny thing is, that's what it started off as. It started off as ultimately just a marketing ploy by Macy's to try to lead people. The idea of a Black Friday was really, we have to dedicate that to Macy's. They created the Christmas rush by having Santa usher in the Christmas holiday at the end of Thanksgiving. All right, Thanksgiving is done. It's now time to start thinking about Christmas. And they were the first ones to use that. I'm telling you, that is probably the most genius marketing plan that has lasted nearly 100 years.
Well, you just said it, though. Let's hope it lasts longer, because let's face it, it's been tough for retail, and Macy's has hung on and done a great job. And let's hope this goes for another 100, because it's really one of the most magical points of the Christmas season.
It really is, again, for kids and adults alike, just to watch those massive balloons floating down Central Park West and all the way down to 34th is really, you know, something to behold.
Steve Overmeyer, one of the biggest kids you'll ever meet.
I am.
He is.
Admittedly.
We both are. Anyway, great job, Steve. Thanks very much.